Hey YouTube, Poopslag here, and this is TurboFat, an open source puzzle game I'm making in Godot. Source code's linked below, and this month I was adding a new Asparagus obstacle and a bunch of crazy new levels to go with it, so let me show you what I've been up to. So I'm trying to focus on flashier and fun-looking gimmicks for trailers and stuff like that that might make the game look more immediately appealing, and I thought having these asparagus stalks bursting in from the sides and spraying rubble everywhere that might be really cool looking. So I sketched out some ideas for how they might look. I thought maybe giving them little arms and legs would be funny, or making them look angry like thwomps and they burst in and they're all pissed off. But I ended up making them just look sort of like innocuous, like, where am I? What's going on? I thought that was a cuter vibe for the game. And I thought having like a fat variation that sort of bursts in and is like, whoa, that thing's so big, that might be kind of funny too. So I wanted to avoid the scenario where I would draw and animate all the asparagus stuff and then figure out after it was all done that the mechanic wasn't fun to play. So I tried prototyping it just using the carrot graphics I already had and just making it sort of work. And the first thing I noticed was to have this like sprite burst in but still interact with the blocks that you're dropping, I needed to have like invisible things in the tile map that your block could hit. So I added 2 rows to all my tile sets for invisible objects that cast a shadow and totally invisible objects with no shadow. And that worked. And then I started wanting to have the carrot like pop out further, but the sprite wasn't long enough. So I was like, I need to stretch it. And if it's on the other side, it needs to be mirrored. And it was just sort of too confusing to work with the placeholder stuff. So I just decided to draw it for real. So for drawing all the asparagus stuff, I started by drawing the spiky stalks that shoot out. And those are inspired by the crushers in Mario World. If you've seen those like spiky things that come down from the ceiling. I wanted these to spiral in too, and I thought that would look cool, but I didn't want to animate them yet, just in case they didn't look quite right in game. I didn't want to have to re-animate all that stuff. I added little mounds of dirt that'll show up on the walls where the asparagus pops out, and those actually have 2 parts, like the front and the back. And then I gave them faces where they can look in different directions and blink, just for a little bit of cuteness. So normally in TurboFat, you'll like make these snack and cake boxes and they get filled with stars, and then you'll clear a line and those stars get turned into food, which gets fed to the customers. Now, the asparagus mechanic can like ruin that because it'll like poke in and destroy a box that had a star in it. So I wanted it to trigger this logic, but I didn't want to trigger it directly because I didn't like the idea of having all these side classes talking to each other. So I added a new signal to the playfield method, which when a piece is destroyed, the asparagus will emit a signal saying like, oh, I destroyed this part of the playfield, and then the star making logic and the food making logic, it'll listen to that and they're like, oh, if that was destroyed, then I need to do something. I thought that was just a little bit better of a design than having all those other side classes talking to each other. So after I added like the sound effects and the particles for these asparagus stalks, I also went back and added some variations. So I could have the fatter versions, or I could have some that would disappear after just like 1 or 2 seconds, or some that would stick around forever. Or maybe they would all stick around forever unless you did something special and then they all disappear at once, things like that. I decided not to animate the spinning in animation because like it was just so sudden when they appeared that I don't think you'd notice it anyway. When I did try to animate it, it didn't look very good to me. So lastly, I got to design a whole bunch of fun levels. First was when I was making the asparagus pop out of the right walls, I realized it sort of blocks the next queue, and that could be really obnoxious. So I made a level where it's just maximally obnoxious, where you can't see your next queue like ever. I made a level where you're digging through this tunnel, and the asparagus that pops out just sort of doesn't really do much because it's already in the walls, which were filled anyway. But the instant you break your combo, it all goes away, and then you're left with these big obnoxious holes. It's such a pain in the ass. And then I also made a level where you have to dig down to this bottom area where all the points are. That's the only way to score very well. But the instant you do it, all this asparagus ambushes you, so you can't do it again very easily. There is a funny little exploit I figured out while I was playtesting the level, so I'll be curious if anybody else figures that out too. It's a way that you can dig down over and over, and I think it's really fun to do though, so I left it in. So that's it for September. We added this new asparagus obstacle and a whole bunch of levels to go with it. And that wraps up Cannoli Sandbar because it's got the characters and the story and the art and the levels and all that stuff's all done. I was hoping to sneak in one last cute little monster, sort of like the Sharks and Moles, who runs around and does something obnoxious. But I'd rather have the game get finished in a reasonable amount of time rather than trying to pack in every last little feature I can think of and having it go on forever. So next month, the last area, Chocolava Canyon, I want to get started on that, storyboarding and drawing some stuff for it and figuring out how the story's going to wrap up. So I hope you'll tune in next month and see what I got done. If you want to try out the game as it is so far, it's free on itch.io, and it should be released sometime next year. So if you want to wishlist it on Steam, that'll really help me out. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next month.